Hi and welcome to this video on shutter speed in photography. Shutter speed is a critical element in photography because it controls how long your camera sensor is exposed to light, and it is part of the exposure triangle along with aperture and ISO. Shutter speeds typically range between 30 seconds and 1/4000th of a second or 1/8000th of a second depending on your camera system. So we have fast shutter speeds, moderate shutter speeds, slow shutter speeds and long exposures. Fast shutter speeds are in the range of 1/500th of a second to 1/4000th of a second. Moderate shutter speeds are between 1/500th of a second right up till 1/60th of a second. Slow shutter speeds are between 1/30th of a second to 1 second, and long exposure is anywhere above 1 second. Since shutter speed works along with aperture and ISO in creating your image, when you use a slow shutter speed, that is, you have the shutter open for a longer period of time, you may want to use a small ISO, that is ISO 100 or ISO 200, and a smaller aperture like 11, 16 and 22. When you use a high shutter speed, that is the shutter is open for a short duration, then you may want to use a wide aperture like 1.4, 2.84, 5.6, or you may want to use a high ISO like ISO 500, 1000, 2000, etc. Every camera has what you call a shutter priority mode or a time value mode. So in this setting, all you need to do is set the shutter speed, and the ISO and the aperture is taken care of by the camera itself. Your ISO could be set by you or it could be in auto mode. This is useful when you are not concerned with what aperture is being used to generate the image. Shutter speed can be used creatively in long exposures. For example, when you want to capture light trails of vehicles, star trails, astrophotography, etc. Shutter speed can also be used creatively in a method called panning. In panning, what you do is you move your camera along with the subject so that in that movement the subject stays still because the camera is also moving at the same rate, whereas the background gets blurred and you find what you call the motion blur in the background. Hand holding your camera. When hand holding your camera, you may want to keep your shutter speed between 1/125th of a second or 1/60th of a second in order to avoid camera shake. So there is also a shutter speed called bulb mode, where you can keep the camera shutter open for as long as you like by keeping the button pressed. This is useful when you are shooting fireworks, light trails, etc. Every camera has what we call a flash sync speed, which is between 1/200th of a second or 1/250th of a second. You may want to set your shutter speed below that value in order to ensure that whilst using flash, you get a properly generated image. If you try to use shutter speeds above 1/250th of a second, then you may get some dark areas appearing in your image because the shutter is not able to keep up with the flash duration. In order to overcome the flash sync speed problem, where you may want to use a higher shutter speed to get your image, you may want to use something called high sync speed, which is available with some camera systems and flashes. Shutter speed can be a problem, especially in very bright areas where you want to use a long exposure. Take for example, you're trying to shoot a waterfall and you want to get the silky smooth look in the water. So for that you need a long exposure, at least above 1 second. And when there is bright light, you may want to adjust your ISO and aperture to the smallest ISO and the smallest aperture. Even after doing that, you may find that you're not able to lower your shutter speed in order to get a proper exposure. So in order to avoid this problem, you may want to use something called a neutral density filter, or what you call an ND filter, and these come in stock values of 1 stop, 2 stop, 3 stops, depending on how much light you want to cut. You also get what you call a variable neutral density filter, which by turning one end of that filter, you can lighten or darken the image as required. So use these shutter speed tips to create fabulous images.